Mr. SC Playbook, Timmy Williams, welcome to the show for the first time. And I'm excited to go through this first test, mate, and looking a little bit around some of the batting technique stuff, getting into the weeds of that, and then some observations just around where we're at for the team and maybe some of the crazy overestimating and just the over publicized media stuff around this team, mate. It's been a wild week.
It has, Jamie, and mate, thank you for having me along on the show. And keen as to get stuck into it. We're going to get into some pretty dirty, nitty gritty stuff later on. And by that, I mean like side on versus square on batting. And then as a bloke with a few runs on the board like yourself and a cricket coach, mate, I'm keen to hear that. So yeah, let's do it.
Beautiful, mate. Well, first, so let's start with some nice things because it was pretty rough on the Australian batting side. But what do you like from the first test, mate?
Oh, yeah, look, result aside, there were some positives, and this pains me to say it, and I feel a little bit crook on the inside with words even coming out of my mouth, but it was just Jaiswal. I can't believe I'm saying about that that about an Indian cricketer coming down under and destroying us in the first test, but everything about him, like first tour obviously down under for a 22-year-old, and he bounces back from a duck in the first inning with that match winning essentially 161 runs. Everything about him, that the blend of like traditional cricket strokes and these flamboyants that he's got as well, bringing up his century with a ramp that he said was premeditated, all of that, like it'd normally infuriate me. And that's not to say that I was happy about it as an Australian cricket fan. I wasn't. Let's get that clear. But can't help but just feel there's something very, very special about this, and not just a flash in the pan batsman who, you see a lot of players in their early days get runs, and then, you give it a year or 2 years, and then opposition coaches and bowlers, they work out their technical flaws. This kid's just something different. And to top it all off, sitting there and saying to Mitch Stark, it's not coming fast enough, and then going on to back that up, you're just like, he's very likable.
Oh, it's impressive. Yeah. And the way he spoke, he had a little interview, I think, with Howie. He sounded great in that as well. And I think like as I've gotten older, you begin to just appreciate greatness when it comes along. You
Mm,
like you sit there and hate on them when they're not on your side. But just seeing that, and especially like how much we struggled for the
yeah.
young 22-year-old to come out and dominate was very impressive after getting a duck.
Yeah, it's mate. He's absolutely incredible, and I'd love nothing more than to see Australia win this series 4-1. And look, he can turn up every game if he wants, as long as we win, mate. What caught your eye? What were the positives out of it?
I just think the quality bowling from both sides, and I think Mitch Stark said it best. They asked him about the pitch, and he's completely right. The bowlers get no love. It's always about the
Mm,
batting. Oh, the pitch is good quality for batters, right? So the pitch was, I think the pitch is solid enough. They picked up 470 odd declared in on day three, day two, and day three, right? So
mm.
the pitch was good enough for both sides, and yeah, I just think that was good for Starkey to come out and say that the pitch was it was just good bowling.
The pitch was awesome, and it's like you sat there after, it's so easy for people and analysts to judge a pitch on what the scores were. And I
Mhm.
think people did that after the first two inningses where, Australia were rolled for a bit over 100, India 150. And you sit there going, oh, yeah, there must be something wrong with the pitch. Like it couldn't possibly be poor batting. And then you go, no, 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 because India came out and put on that monster score in their second innings. And you know, it was just poor batting. So I thought the pitch offered a little bit of everything. And it was interesting, I think, even might have been at the toss. And they were sort of speaking about how there'll be a bit of life in it early. And Pat Cummins was saying he was happy for Australia to be bowling first, and that it would probably flatten out and harden up, with the hot weather over in Perth around sort of day 2 or 3, and then potentially a few cracks might appear later on. It panned out exactly that way, and off the back of getting through those first two innings so quickly, by the time India got in for their big third innings, the deck had flattened out, and there was plenty of bounce, plenty of opportunity. So I thought the pitch played really nicely.
Yeah, and that's fun cricket. Like watching them bat, and, 6 for 470 odd. That's when it can get a bit boring. It's like, oh well, they're just
Mm.
doing it too easy. Whereas that 250, 300 kind of innings are so good to watch because every ball you're on the edge of your seat, which is great. But I also thought, mate, the crowd. I know they give them crap over in Perth about the amount of people they get there, but it was actually a record for them. So that was good to see that Australian cricket is going in the right direction on that front. And then I just think Alex Carey and Travis Head, how Head batted in the second innings, and then how Alex batted in both, I think
Mm.
was fairly impressive, and it's good to see. I think he's the one that's in form out of all the batters, so that was nice to see.
Yeah, it is. And look, it helps crowd wise. Record crowds over in Perth when three-quarters of them are Indians going to support the tourists. But look, it was awesome. And look, I'd expect it to be similar all summer with such a big Indian fan base over in Australia. But it just shows how much the Australian India series, pardon me, means, to Australian cricket fans. Of course, we know it does to Indian cricket fans over here. But and the mere fact that they've added the extra test this year, the first time ever that Australia and India have played 5 tests down in Australia or ever, I believe. And
Mm.
I'm so excited. Like after last summer, I think it was what, Pakistan and West Indies, where you're sitting there going, let's call it what it was. It was a bit of a bludger, even with that famous West Indies win, which I think even Aussie fans weren't that concerned about because it added a bit of life to the summer of cricket. But it's such an exciting summer ahead. It means so much. We had years of dominance against India down here, and then the last few series they've really stuck it to us, and we've gone no, no, no. Like they're not a walkover down in Australia. So it's set it up magnificently. Oh, how good am I going? Magnificently, and I'll be at the Sydney Test. Hopefully, get some other cricket, but the whole summer is set up tremendously.
Yeah, and then England next year. So it is great to see.
Oh,
As much as I talk about, the media just destroying players, that looking at the next five batters to come in, all that sort of stuff. It's great that
mm,
people care. I suppose
mm.
is the great thing for Australian cricket. But mate, the big question: have Australia lost their mongrel or their edge? What do you think?
To a degree, yes. And I think we saw it at different stages in that test match. And like, particularly for ourselves, Jamie, like we grew up and our golden era was, well, we grew up with Ponting and Hayden and McGrath, these like win at all cost kind of characters, these hard edged cricketers. So it's a little bit different now, and it has been for a number of years. And I love nothing more than just Grubb's win at all cost attitude when on field that we've seen. And then the game finishes and you shake hands, you put everything that happened on the field behind you and you have a beer and you celebrate, which made, the Ashes last year or the year before, whatever it was, when England had a bit of a hissy fit and didn't have a beer with Australia after the series or after the game. That was like, come on, boys, leave it out there. Like, get over it. It's sport. It means a lot. But when you walk off that field, everything that happened on the field, just forget about it. Um, all that being said, whilst I wish the Aussies had a harder edge to them than what we probably saw over in Perth, and what we've seen a little bit of times, the reality is we're the current World Test champions. Prior to that India loss, we were number one in the current rankings in this 2 year cycle. We're the ODI World Cup champions. So at the same time, there's no reason to say that less aggression can't work because let's say that this current Australian squad has less aggression than squads of the past. It results wise, it can't have been too much better. So if we get to the end of this Indian series and we've lost it, and we've gone down 3-2 or 3-1, whatever it might be, then we can reassess the aggression and how we need to approach it. But for the time being, it's a one-off loss. It was bad, but we move on, and let's hopefully it was a one-off.
Yeah. Hey, I personally think it's just the type of players that we have at the moment. You look at
Mm,
Marnus and Smithy, they talk with runs, is how
mm,
they show their dominance, and they're not that type of player. Actually, there's a funny clip that popped up. Hadn't seen it in a while. Was the Skyer, I think it was in a one dayer, and
mm.
Ponting's called it for his, and Smith ended up running into him as he caught it, and he
Yeah,
just chucked the hissy fit and thrown the ball on the ground. It was so good.
yeah,
But a lot of people didn't like Ponting for his anger, like those types of things he displayed as well. So I don't think he can win, right? These boys, they're nice guys, and as soon as we lose the match, it's like, oh, it's because they aren't idiots or they're not mongrels, right? So yeah, I just think they talk with their runs and they haven't scored runs recently. That's just the problem. And you
yeah.
look at Kawaja as well. McSweeney's not going to be that guy. You can see a little bit of that in sort of Travis Head and Marsh and obviously some of our bowlers as well. But yeah, I just think that if they go back to scoring runs, that's not a
Mm.
topic that we speak about.
And mate, that's why Ricky Ponting is one of the greatest cricketers of all time
Mm.
because he had killer instinct and he had an edge. And you grew up playing decent levels of sport. Obviously, I grew up playing a lot of sport as well, and I envied the people who had that win at all costs attitude. I'm a competitive bloke, but there's not a professional athlete out there who's like blasé and easygoing in terms of when they're out there and They're they're judged on their results, and you have to care more than your opposition and people you're going up against to be the best of the best. And anyone who was against Ponting and saying that, oh, he was over the top and he was too competitive, whatever, it's like, well, that's why you're watching from your lounge room with your beer in your hand, and that's why Ricky Ponting is one of our greatest ever. I love it personally.
Yeah. Oh, the armchair critics, they're good fun. I suppose we're doing this. We're doing the same right
Yeah,
now, but
yeah, we are armchair critics, but
yeah,
I can
exactly.
appreciate what Punter was like.
Yeah, that's right. And mate, would you make any changes to 11? There's a lot of people calling for, Marnus's head and the like. And if not, how many more tests of these, poor performances would you allow
Mm.
before you made a change?
It's a really tough one because the big one's obviously minus Labuschagne. And to answer your question, I wouldn't make any changes. I would give Marnus one more test. He's done enough. And the fact that it is on Australian soil, we should be getting pretty decent decks that the players are familiar with. So there's no real excuses. So I'd be looking to give Marnus Adelaide. And if he doesn't perform there, I would drop him. That being said, there's another round of Shield cricket to go. So my concern is that, let's say we go to Adelaide, he gets two single digit scores, then he gets dropped. He goes back and plays Big Bash, and there's still three tests against India where there's no reason why Marnus can't be a key figure for us in winning the series. So I'm like, do you drop him for Adelaide, give him a round of Shield cricket, allow him to go back out there, hopefully spend some time at the crease, get some confidence back in, some time in the middle, and then let's say whoever it is that they bring in for him, whether it's Webster, Inglis, if they go no good, you bring him back up with runs to his name.
Mm.
I do see an opportunity there. However, I think at the same time, you say to Webster, you say to Inglis, etc., you've got another round of Shield cricket. Go out, hit a ton for us, and then if Marnus goes no good, you come in. That's obviously the spot of contention for me. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think the scores is part of it, but we know that these are the best batters in the country right now. My problem
Mm,
is how we're going to get into the batting technique in a second, but how they actually
mm,
come out and look in this next test, and if they change anything. Because if he doesn't change anything, Marnus, for example, he's going to get skittled. It's just going to continue to happen until he makes the necessary changes. So if he comes out of the next, I think, the next couple of tests personally, and looks the same, then he's gone. If he still gets out, like let's just say he gets a 30 in the first, gets out for 10 in the second innings, and it looks a little bit better, and he's looking to change things, I think that he's fine because he's still, one of our top five
mm.
best batters in the country. So similar
Yeah.
to the other guys, because none of them came into this series scoring runs. Smithy was averaging 37 in recent history. I think Kawaja was in the low 30s. Marnus was a little bit lower at 20, 27. Even Head came in at 28 in his last 20
Mm,
innings. So no one's scoring well at the moment, but they need to show these necessary improvements, in my opinion, to
mm.
get some more tests under their belt.
Yeah, and
Every
that's it, mate. It's all good and well to say, all right, drop them, but it's like there's no one like banging the door down at state cricket to say you have to pick me, you have to pick me. There's blokes who have put their hand up, but
mm.
no one really saying you have to put me in this side. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go.
Yeah, well, Inglis is the guy I think that has
Mm,
that sort of age and experience. And
mm,
in the last 3 or 4 years, he's averaging what 57 in Shield, which
mm,
is and he's already in the Australian setup, so he's got that under his belt as well. But mate, let's talk about some batting. Super excited about
mm,
this part. I haven't seen a lot out there around sort of technique and it's more just about, oh, he's just not performing. Okay, well, why isn't he performing? And what can they do about it? But at least just to give the general punter a bit of an idea on how it works and why they're getting out, I suppose. So let's
mm.
talk about sort of the survival mindset that we're seeing from Marnus. You nicked off early, got dropped by Kohli. That was nice to watch. And then, went on to battle for two off 52 and then played across the line, trying to score eventually, but it was the wrong shot. So let's talk about survival mindset, mate, versus playing with some intent and some confidence. What do you see around those two?
Yeah, and I mean, like Marnus is the example at the moment because he's coming off that 52 ball two, which tough to watch. And there's a few ways of looking at it because if it's a controlled two ball 52, I don't care. I'm like, especially if wickets are tumbling and you need to stabilise the innings. And we saw over in Perth that players that, particularly India in that second innings, and Travis Head was able to go on with his score. Alex Carey got a few runs. Players that got themselves in and got themselves settled, they were able to go on with it. But the first innings of Australia and India, no one could get themselves in. So
No.
it was like they didn't adjust to the conditions. So I'm happy for a player to go as slow as they want if it's controlled, and I don't really care if they're not showing too much intent because again, that's where it comes into cricket's a game of partnerships. And Australia's batting order, it's pretty aggressive. Like
Yeah.
there's not really anyone in there who's not going to be somewhat attacking and like looking to score runs and score boundaries. So if Marnus is there and he's 2 off 52 and it's controlled and he's steadying the innings and he's getting himself in, I'm happy for it because you're probably going to have, or in theory, you should have someone like an Usman Khawaja or a Travis Head and Alex Carey, Steve Smith, someone like that who is keeping the scoreboard ticking over. So in terms of mindset, it's all about firstly working in partnerships and why you're going slow. Why is it taking you so long? And yes, and Marnus was a prime example of it over in Perth.
Yeah, we saw a few of the other guys, I know, especially the second innings, Smithy and the like, but we'll speak about them in a sec. But
Mm,
I think Pujara is a really cool example of that. He always looked in control. He was scoring
mm,
slowly. He'd build that partnership from one end and didn't look like getting out, right? He was the rock. So we've seen it from Dravid and these types of guys
yeah.
coming through that they, yeah, might score slower, but they looked good when they were doing it. And there was a purpose. They knew what they were doing. They knew their technique. And that's, I think, where the boys are struggling a little bit. The consistency in technique isn't there. And then just even the way that they're playing a little bit. We heard, Clark's comments there. Boomer's the guy that he's going to target the stumps and, leaving the ball there or coming too far across when the ball's coming into you and you're moving opposite to the way that the ball's coming into you. Your head's moving across that way. That makes it so tough to hit the ball, especially if it's moving off the seam as well. So, in that one there, if you're playing, if Marnus was to be playing a Hazelwood or a Cummins, these types of guys that really hit the deck and they're looking in that channel, then he can leave the ball. But when
Mm,
when you're facing Bumrah, he's coming in towards those stumps. It's a bit skiddier. Just that those decisions in trying to leave the ball on length, it just isn't going to work as well. So that was just a simple technique thing, but just where his mind is at.
mm.
He's looking. He's
Especially on, yeah.
gone.
I was say, especially on a deck like Perth, where you're going like there's that extra bounce. So you're going, do you sit back in your crease and allow for that extra bounce? Do you get on your front foot and try and sort of take LBW out as much as you can with someone like Bumrah? At the end of the day, and we're going to be able to reflect on this in four test time, but sometimes with a player like Bumrah, you just go, he's just world class, and perhaps our batting lineup weren't up to it. But and that's the other thing. Sorry to cut you off, Jamie, but talking about like partnerships and the speed that Marnus went at, it is so important that if you do have someone like, you mentioned Pujara, you mentioned Dravid back in the day, the amount of tests that I sat at the Sydney Cricket Ground growing up, watching these blokes that were 2 off 40 balls and all that and just going slow as, but they were just building innings, but it worked back in the day and it certainly works now as well. You need to have that foil next to you because if you're going that slow and the bloke at the other end is doing the same, and, back in there with Dravid, he'd have a Sehwag there, or he'd have a Tendulkar who was
Yeah.
scoring at a much higher click. It becomes a net session for the bowlers because they just settle into a rhythm. There's no intent against them. And that's when you're sort of inviting trouble into your game. So, again, it all goes back to partnerships.
Yeah. And the biggest thing that those boys missed out on then, unfortunately, was the bad ball. It's because they weren't
Mm.
weren't
Yeah.
thinking to score off that they'd miss, Marnus missed a couple down leg. He hit a cover drive to cover, like just those ones where you weren't thinking where you're going to hit the ball. You're thinking about your technique. You're thinking about just trying to stay in rather than I'm coming to you and I'm going to try and dictate terms, whether it's
Mm.
hitting a two or three through the gap or whether it's just defending with authority. I think that's probably the big thing that was missing in this test match. There's a lot of the guys being stuck on the crease and speak about that shortly, but I just felt like that was
Mm.
the big difference that we actually miss out on those bad balls, which Pajara and those guys that, they'd spend some time there, but they'd hit the bad ball and they'd wait and build that innings once they got more comfortable.
Yeah, unfortunately, as great as T20 cricket is, the introduction of it has really killed off the patience and the proper Test cricket mindset of a lot of batters in the current generation, and for the best part of the last decade or so, and that's why you see a lot of these players who do sort of specialise and succeed in Test cricket. they're still sitting there and they're willing to build their way into innings and take their time. Whereas T20 cricket players just want to play shots, and that works sometimes, but holy moly, it doesn't at others.
Yeah. Oh, we've seen Bazball foul
Mm,
plenty as well. So,
exactly.
mate, I just want to focus on this section here of being squared up versus side on batting. And I went through all the wickets, did some analysis there, and six of the 12 wickets from the top six batters were from squaring up. And that included three edges to slips or keeper and three LBWs as well. And
Mm,
I personally think all six could have been prevented with just a slightly better technique. So in the first innings, it was Khawaja who nicked off on that one, and you had Smith and Marnus getting LBW, and then Mitch Marsh nicked off as well. And so Khawaja's and Mitch's were the nicks,
mm,
and just to give a bit of context on it, staying side on, what that allows the bat to do is actually come through straight. So as soon as you start to square up a little bit and twist your shoulders towards the bowler, that actually changes your bat path a little bit, and it just slightly comes across your body. And what that does,
mm,
then you see the ball coming from here, and because they're going slightly across, it ends up just catching that nick, and that's where it goes. Whereas if you do play the line for a ball, and these two balls that I'm talking about for Kawaja and Marsh, and then Smith in the second innings as well, they actually didn't do much off the wicket. So if they came through and played their bat straight through, they would have probably hit at least close to the middle of that, or at least a part where they're not edging it. And I thought that was a bit of an issue. And that one from Smithy in the second innings, he's like jumping around like crazy, and the commentators were
mm,
like, well, yeah, it moved away a bit. And then they actually looked at the ball before and then that ball, and it just went straight through. There wasn't any movement off the seam. And if he just stayed side on and played that solid, he wouldn't be out. So yeah, it wasn't like it was just crazy movement around. Obviously, some of the balls that came back in for LBWs were the ones that got some more movement. And you saw that with Marnus playing across the line in that first one for a ball that was dead straight off Siraj. And then, yeah, Smithy just getting too far across, like I said earlier. And then in that second innings, again, not playing straight and just moving too much and squaring up and copping it in front. So I just felt like they were just some really simple things that no one's talking about, and that's are causing us trouble. And it's something that Smithy and Marnus didn't do before. Smithy would move across, but then he'd get still at impact, whereas he's moving a bit too much at the moment. And then with Marnus, he used to stay really still and play it so late, and now he's again moving too much around and either playing across the line to balls that he shouldn't be as well. So yeah, I thought that was some tough viewing for someone that
mm.
enjoys watching batting, that's for sure.
Yeah, look, mate, it's great insight. We need to get you on the coaching staff of the Aussie cricket team. I reckon Smithy'd take that well coming from you, but you're spot on in what you're saying. And like to state the obvious, and you taught it from a very young age as a cricketer. If you're driving, you're playing through the line, whatever it might be, rather than rolling those wrists, bigger bat face, more opportunity to hit the ball. So it's no, I like where you're coming from.
Yeah. I got to play with Smithy, but definitely didn't give him any
Yeah,
tips.
Sutherland.
Yeah, when he came back and when he was banned. So, but I definitely didn't give him any tips at that point. But
Interesting. Was
it was
it?
also,
Did you play with Watson as well?
yeah, if I got 5 or 6 years with Watto, he's a legend. He's the
I
best.
was going to say I went down. I was living in. I don't live in Cronulla anymore, but I was living in Cronulla at the time. And when Smithy and Warner were banned, I went down to Glen McGrath Oval there,
Yep.
and it was such a great turnout when Smithy and what well we said Watto played a fair bit of it, but when Smithy came out, watched him, and to watch him bat that day, I think he hit 80 or 90 from memory off about it was about 140 or 50 balls,
Yeah.
like about. And I was just sitting there watching him going, this bloke has gone from dominating, being the best batsman in the world, gone through his troubles, comes back to, local heat cricket essentially. And just the intent that he was just like, no, I'm not going out there just to belt it around and, flash the bat. When my band's up, I'll be back in the Australia team. He just played it like any other innings as if he was playing test cricket. I just watched him going, look, that is the mindset. We spoke about mindset before and the importance of it and the intent. He was just like, he played every ball in its merits. At the same time, David Warner was playing with, I think it was Ramwick Petersham,
Mm.
and he was sort of going out there and flashing the bat a bit. Same thing going, I'll be back in the Australian setup as soon as this band's lifted. Smithy was just like, no, I'm earning every run that I can get. I loved it.
Yeah. You would have seen me bat then. I think I got like 15, caught and bowled. I think batted at four. So
15 of the best, Jamie.
that's right. Wasn't my best, but Yeah, it was a weird one. But Smithy, he averaged like 35 for us and then went straight back in
Mm,
the Aussie team and averaged 60 something for in the test against the
unreal,
best bowlers in the world. It was
unreal.
wild. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, mate. And then we'll finish up really with the it's a big problem with getting caught on the crease as well. I just wanted to
Mm,
to talk through that. And getting caught on the crease usually means you're not getting your body to the ball, right? And in that case, it means your head just stays up a little bit higher. And a good example, I think, is to use as a catch, right? If I was to throw the ball at your knees, you're bringing your body down to the ball, getting your eyes as close to it as possible to catch that.
mm.
And that's something that the boys aren't doing as much. If they're getting caught in the crease, not getting forward, you don't drive your body to the ball and your eyes are just further away. And it's very hard to hit a ball going that fast and moving around when you're not close to the ball. So if you're watching that as well, I think that's just something to note down also, mate. What do you see
Yeah,
around that?
yeah, and that's it. All comes out sort of adapting to the conditions in the wicket that you're playing on as well, doesn't it? So we take, for example, a deck like Perth. It's such a bouncy wicket, always has been, always will be, and you can. It sort of allows you to potentially sit back in the crease a little bit more. I know certainly in the first innings, Virat Kohli, he batted a long way out of his crease for
Yeah, it was
that one,
weird.
but. Yeah, it was so weird. But like you can get back in your crease there because you know that if you sort of do get trapped on it a little bit, because that extra bounce, it sort of nullifies a bit of the LBW risk. Whereas at say like an Adelaide Oval where there's going to be a swinging ball, it's a day-night match. We know that pink ball is going to be moving around. So a player might bat further out of the crease. You have to get forward. You have to make sure
Mm.
that if you are getting hit on the pad, you're getting hit out of the line and all those sorts of things. So it comes back to, mate, it's a word we've used a lot, but it's cricket, so it is intent, and you have to know exactly what you're going to do going out into your innings based on the deck. They've done ample research, they know what they need to do, and not being caught in two minds of am I going back, am I going forward? It's committing to one or the other. And yeah, that's where the Aussies got caught out a lot in between those, I think, probably two thought processes over in Perth.
Yeah, man, that's a terrific point. Moving to Adelaide now is the bounce isn't going to be as much. It's a lovely deck to bat on, but yeah, with that
Mm,
pink ball and probably a little bit more swing, then yeah, it's going to be really, really important to get forward and, as you said, get yourself out of the opportunity for the umpire to give you out LBW, especially
mm.
there, mate. So that's a good insight. And mate, just to finish off, who's next in line in the batting ranks? Because everyone's talking about people need to get dropped, people need to come in. I think it might just be a little opportunity to give some love and some flowers to the guys that are doing well there. So who do you have in your sort of list for next up?
Yeah, look, I mean, Josh Inglis is the obvious one, isn't he? And the second one is Bo Webster. It depends which way they want to go. So let's say, for argument's sake, let's say Marnus Labuschagne does get dropped for the Adelaide Test or for the third Test, whatever it might be. I think it's probably a battle between those two at the moment because no one else has really put their hand up too much. We saw Cameron Bancroft bounce back to
Yeah,
form finally after a very lean start to summer. He got a ton. I'm so
good
happy
on
for
him.
him. So
Yeah.
I'd love to see him back that up. But I mean, you look at Bo Webster. We saw certainly in that, or only in that second innings of India, Australia bowled 143 overs or something like that. They got about 12 out of Mitch Marsh, and he was on and off the field and getting treatment, and he's a constant injury risk, and they don't want to be bowling him too much. So I'm hoping that was a one-off in terms of the amount of overs we had to bowl and how dominated we were on probably more spin-friendly decks. We can get a few more effective overs out of Nathan Lyon, and we don't have to rely too much on Mitch Marsh. That being said, if they are thinking that they need another seamer in there, well, rather than a specialist batsman, Bo
Mm.
Webster, he does become very interesting because let's look at his recent scores. 61 and 49 against New South Wales. He had a 42 before that. For Australia A, earlier on 46 not out, 33 and 61 not out against India A. So he has runs on the ball. We know he's a very capable bowler. You're not going to drop Mitch Marsh. Like he is in our top six batsmen in Australia, and you can pick him as a bat only, even if only getting a handful of overs out of him. But it just comes down to do the selectors feel they need that extra bowling option in Webster, or do they go with a more proven batter in Josh Inglis? So I don't know. It's all up to where the direction that they want to go with. But mate, that's beyond me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think English should be next
Mm.
and then Webster as well. But I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the young guys that are doing well at the moment. Obviously, Constas has been in all of the media. Campbell Kellaway just picked up 120 odd. He's a
Mm.
youngster coming through. So that was a nice score for him after a duck. Jaden Goodwin, back to back, great
Yes.
scores. So that was good to see. And then Henry Hunt, I've actually yeah, got to hang out with him a little bit and played against him plenty. It's good to see him pick up 100 the other day at the top of the order for South Australia. And then Tim Ward, back to back tough
Mm.
ones, 92 and 96, the poor fella. Well, we can't be too sad for him, but
Yeah,
yeah,
could be worse.
yeah,
But
that's true.
yeah, you mentioned Jaden Goodwin there, back to back tons. So there are some exciting prospects. As we know, we don't want to be flashing the pan. Build it up. Average 70 through the Aussie summer, like domestic summer. It might be a thing of the past where players would average 70 to 80 and they were knocking down the door for spots in the Australian Test team. But that's what we need to see it, don't we? And to justify dropping someone like Marnes, it's like, all right, who do we know is in red hot form and can convert it to Test level? Big watch.
Yeah, hopefully it comes good. But thanks so much, Tim, for jumping on.